you reach the age of 65, often you think it's a time to celebrate, don't you? But I don't think the NHS can celebrate this year. It's under attack like never before. And it's going to have to fight for its life. And that's why we're here today, to try our best to help save it as we battle with those who wish to see it reduced to a rump service. Now, I've spoken at quite a lot of meetings in the past few years, and it's fantastic hearing different stories. But a couple of what situations just stand out. There was one time when a lady stood up, and she's a nurse from the USA living in England, and she was telling her story, and she just started crying, and she got herself settled down. And then she said, "I'm just so upset that you're turning your NHS into a US-style healthcare system. I'm just so overwhelmed by it all." She was just really upset. And she told a little story about when she was in New York on a bus. She got on, and this girl sat down next to her, and this girl was really happy and smiling, and she just started to chat with her and said, "Oh, you're having a good day?" She said, "I'm really happy." She said, "I got a job today." And she said, "Oh, that's great," she said. And yeah, she said, "And I've got health insurance." And that was just all that she wanted, was health insurance. Because again, I've heard another story about a lady. She had an 8-year-old son, and she's in America, and she's still paying off her health bills from her delivery. She had a normal delivery in the USA. She had insurance even, but the insurance didn't cover everything, and they had to do what's called co-payments, and she had to pay extra on top, and she's still paying those bills 8 years later. And that really does make me want to fight harder for our NHS. 50 million people a year in the USA go bankrupt because they can't afford to pay their healthcare bills. And that's something we really must not head towards in this country. Now, the NHS is under attack by a Tory-led coalition. They wish to see public services deprived of their funding. Deprived of funding so the services worsen. And then they'll say, well, look how bad things are. We'll have to privatise them. It's just what happened in the 90s under Major's government with the railways. They deprived it of funding, frontline funding, services worsened, and by 95, Major said, well, we'll have to privatise it. And that's what happened. And we see now the absolute ludicrous situation where we're paying £4 billion a year in subsidies to the train operating companies, and they're going in there, operating the service and making a profit. And we're subsidising that profit. It's utter madness. You couldn't make it up, could you? You really couldn't make it up. And this is what's going to happen to the NHS. We heard brilliantly from John Lister before about how it's going to be parcelled up into smaller services run by private companies. It probably will still be free to use, but behind that hugely trusted and valued NHS symbol will be profit-hungry private companies. Profits distort priorities away from patients and towards share prices. Now, there is talk always about reconfiguration, and I think we need to be honest that sometimes reconfiguration is the right thing to do. If we look in London, for example, at stroke services, the care for stroke patients was haphazard really. It was a bit piecemeal across dozens of hospitals, and a decision was made to centralise stroke care into about 7 hospitals across London, and they reckon now about 400 lives have been saved by doing that, and life-changing disabilities have been prevented. Now that's when reconfiguration is the right thing to do. In my area in North Lancashire, in Carnforth, my patients would have a certain type of heart attack that the paramedic will assess. They'll go straight past Lancaster to Blackpool, where there's an amazing cardiothoracic facility, and they'll get rapid treatment by specialists who are there day in, day out, and they do lots of these over and over again, so they're very specialised and they've got the expertise. That's when reconfiguration is correct. But what's not right is when local hospitals have services threatened by Whitehall imposed cuts. We need local, high-quality services from our hospitals. And the NHS, of course, it must adapt and change, but the way that works doesn't mean just closing an A&E department. As John said again this morning, closing an A&E is like turning off the heartbeat of a hospital. You don't get the acute admissions. You don't need orthopaedics and surgical on call because there's no emergencies coming through. It's like a domino effect. Departments close down. And as John rightly said, if you want to close a hospital down, just close down the A&E first. Lewisham was an example. A neighbouring trust that was in financial difficulty due to the cuts. Lewisham was providing a great service, but the managers decided, let's close Lewisham A&E down to save some money. Utterly mad. It was a busy, well-respected hospital in Lewisham. No problems at all. Now that's what I call evidence-free policy. And that's happening all over the NHS, and it's got to stop. We've got to use evidence-based medicine. As a doctor, if I see a patient, I'll use the best evidence to treat you with the drugs that are required. I don't just think of something that might work or might not. It's not been tested. No, I use evidence, and that's what our politicians must do. But time and again, they ignore that. And another shocking revelation is when ministers leave office and they end up working for the very same multinational companies that they set contracts up in when they were in office. Also senior civil servants, we've seen them moving from Whitehall into the private lobbying sector to lobby ministers they used to work for. You know, this so-called revolving door in Westminster into cushy directorships. It is disgrace. It should be made illegal. We should stop this. Vested interests are rife in Whitehall. And then we're seeing the very own shock doctrine in the NHS now with the £20 billion of enforced cuts on the NHS. No health economy has slashed 1/6 of its budget in such a way. There's absolutely no evidence base, again, for these cuts. You know, time and again I've questioned people in authority, managers, but they can't give a reason for this 20 billion figure. It was plucked out of the air, actually, by McKinsey in 2008, when New Labour asked them to look at a review of the NHS. And since then, this £20 billion has been the focus of every manager in the NHS. They just look at it day in, day out, and it means frontline cuts, and that's why we're seeing all these problems now. Why is the NHS turning from a caring service into a tick box service? And the fallouts are hitting us really hard now. We're seeing nurses are sacked, waiting lists are lengthening, patients are in pain longer, services under threat, hospital departments are being closed. But the management consultants are still there. They're rife in the NHS. I see them all over the place. They're offering advice, and they've never worked in frontline healthcare. Hundreds of millions of pounds are being spent on McKinsey, KPMG, all these international companies. And they're the ones who advise the NHS to save 20 billion, and now they're being paid to tell the NHS how to save that 20 billion. It's the Nicholson paradox, isn't it? Now, Jeremy Hunt, he's our current Secretary of State, he's got the breathtaking hypocrisy to slash hospital budgets and then criticise them for not having enough nurses. You know, we've already lost 7,000 nurses since the last election. And we should stop these millions of pounds being spent on management consultants who only care for eye-watering daily fees, and invest in nurses who care for our patients. And then only today, Jeremy Hunt has said he wants openness and transparency in the NHS. Well, I couldn't agree more with him, but why don't we have more openness and transparency about the multi-million-pound NHS fees that are being paid to private contractors? And they all hide under that old excuse of commercial confidentiality. It's impossible to find out what these contracts are worth or what's in them. We should be told how taxpayers' money is being spent. So what we see now is what I think is privatising the profits and socialising the risk. When it suits the private providers, they walk away with the profits, and the NHS picks up the tab. The PIP breast scandal was a case in point. Now, one private company was making millions out of these breast implants. Then problems occurred with those implants. They saw the potential for the huge compensation coming. What did? They went into administration and set themselves up under a different name. They washed the hands of the desperate women who needed treatment, and the NHS picked up the tab. The NHS moved quickly in, and those women who rightly deserved that treatment got their treatment. But there's the private sector showing their true colours. It just shows what happens when we let profits come before patients. And we need a publicly funded, publicly delivered and publicly accountable NHS. Nothing short of that will do. Politicians, take note. I'm sorry to say some of my medical colleagues as well, during the whole health bill debate, didn't stand together and oppose that health bill sell-off. And I think some of that is down to the leadership. You know, they didn't stand up, they didn't oppose the government at the time, and there's more to be said on that in the future. But today is really encouraging. We must really work more closely together. There is a body out there, a huge body that opposes what's happening in our NHS. We must write to local papers. It makes a difference. Really badger your MP. I write to my MP. Nothing gets an MP more worried than repeated letters about an issue, particularly one that's going to be a big issue in the next general election, and the NHS will be. So go out and speak to 2 or 3 people and tell them to write to their MP, because it really does make a difference. And I was looking up here, never a truer word was said by Aaron Bevan. You know, the NHS will last as long as there are folk left with the faith to fight for it. Well, we're some of those people. We need to fight for it. There's forces out there that wish to destroy the founding principles of the NHS, and it's down to us to go out there, rally support, and ensure it remains the envy of the world. Now, I've spoken to doctors from many countries, and they think we're utterly mad for what we're doing for our NHS, which they wish to emulate in their country. So finally, just to say, we need to look after our NHS in its 65th year. The election will be a huge NHS battleground. That's why something like this must carry on with momentum, to stand up for the NHS as the jewel in the crown. We must hold politicians to account. Never let them forget that we will always stand up for the NHS as the best healthcare system in the world. Thank you.